Hi, everyone. I'd like to take a minute here to welcome you to our first Future of Work webinar. As you may or may not know, my name is Jonathan Coleman, and I am Executive Director of the Algoma Workforce Investment Corporation, or AWIC for short. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we, or at least I am, in the Robertson-Huron Treaty Territory, and the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. And specifically, again, I'm in Sault Ste. Marie, we're in the Garden River and Batchewana First Nations, as well as Métis people. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with AWIC, we are one of 26 workforce planning boards across the province, and we're funded by the Ministry of Labor, Training, and Skills Development. And really our primary goal is to provide easy to access, quality assured labor market information for the Algoma region that allows individuals to make decisions about future careers, employers to plan for their workforce, and also work with community stakeholders to help inform their policy and support their local workforces. So on an annual basis, AWIC takes on a number of different projects, and this Future of Work webinar series is one of them. And so I'm just going to switch my slide here. So The Future of Work webinar series really is a group of uh, webinars with subject matter experts in a number of different fields. And today we're starting out with a future of work, kind of a general look, a big picture look at the future of work. And we're going to be hearing from Andrew Schrumm from RBC in a few minutes, but later on in the week, we're actually going to have a number of different webinars, but we'll be having the future of work where we focus specifically on education, and that's going to be with Charles Pascal, and he's a professor at OISE at the University of Toronto, and he's going to be speaking about his perspective on secondary education, secondary school. Friday, we're doing future of work in manufacturing, and we're very fortunate to have David McHattie join us from Tenaris. Tenaris obviously is a large employer in Algoma. And David is also the chairperson for the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. So he's kind of bringing two perspectives to us for manufacturing. Next week, the journey continues. We're going to be looking at the future of mining, which obviously is a big deal in the Superior East region of Algoma. And Don DeVell is going to join us from Sudbury, and he's the CEO of Norcat. So we'll get his perspectives. And then finally, we're going to be looking at the future of work in healthcare, sort of the changing models of healthcare and how that's going to impact how those roles are going to change in the future and how that's going to impact healthcare and employment in that sector. So that's happening next Thursday. You can register for all of these webinars on our website, and registration's still open. So hopefully you can join us for those. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. Today's session will probably be about an hour. So we'll have a presentation and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So there's no worry on timing there. So we are recording the session. So if you have colleagues that you think might benefit from seeing this, that can join us, they can watch it. You can also come back and watch it as well, but it will be recorded. Audio for the participants is muted. So if you have a question, if it pops up into your head, pop it into the Q&A function that you should see on your screen, or into the chat function. And basically, we're not going to interrupt the presentations for questions, but we'll circle back around and then answer all those questions after the presentation. So if you think of a question, just type it in and we'll come back to it. You will get a follow-up email. So you'll get all the links, to the recorded session and any other materials that, might be relevant to the presentation. When you leave the webinar, or when we close it, you will get a survey that pops up, participant survey. If you could just fill that out, that really helps us, get a sense of what went well in the survey, and please give us your feedback on the survey. And then finally, I'm so used to doing these kind of workshops and webinars in person. Usually I'm in a hotel room, conference room, and the first thing we always do is point out where the where the washrooms are. If you don't know where your closest washroom is, I mean, you're on your own. So hopefully that's all taken care of. So without further ado, I mean, I'm very excited about today's presentation. One of the benefit of, I guess, COVID and remote work is you can kind of cherry pick who you ask, to come present in our region. And, usually getting people to come in the winter time to Algoma is a challenge, but we've been fortunate in that we've gotten some great subject matter experts to agree to join us online. And today is certainly a case of that. So if you're unfamiliar with RBC's thought leadership reports, they are a great resource for timely economic forecasts and analysis. So I use them all the time. So I'm always going on the site looking for new reports. You know, and they're always have a great perspective, either from a national, provincial perspective on trends and economic issues. And then I try to, you know, align that with what's going on in Algoma. So again, we live in an era of information overload. So I just find RBC's analysis is always delivered in a clear, concise, easy to understand way, whether it's an article, infographics, reports, or podcasts. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of the thought leadership team. So I'm pretty excited that we've got, you know, members of RBC and the thought leadership team here to present. So without further ado, then I'm going to, we're grateful to have the RBC team here, including local members of the RBC team. So I'm going to throw it over to Scott Simon, who is RBC's regional vice president, and he's going to say a few words and introduce our keynote speaker. Oh, just hang on a second. I think you just have to unmute. Perfect.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. Great to be with you. And you basically stole my intro here, but thanks for the kind words about RBC. And we wanted to thank our Sault Ste. Marie local community market team for being here today too. I'm Scott Simon, Regional VP for RBC in Northern Ontario, based out of Sudbury, and we lead a team of about 250 employees and partners across the north. And Sault Ste. Marie is an awesome part of our region and a very important market for us. So it's great to be with you today. It's my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker. His name is Andrew Schrumm, Senior Manager Research from RBC Royal Bank of Canada. So based in RBC's thought leadership, as Jonathan alluded to, Andrew researchers and writes on emerging trends in the Canadian economy. In this role, he manages RBC's Humans Wanted research project that aims to advance thinking on skills-based job mobility, post-pandemic labor market, and the digital workplace. Andrew joined our RBC team in 2018 and has written on skills development, online education, automation, as well as sectoral labor studies on agriculture, healthcare, and skilled labor trades. Andrew's career has been split between roles in research and regulatory policy, examining how institutions and markets respond to change. Most extensively, he managed research projects at the Center for International Governance Innovation on topics covering the G20 and global finance, emerging economies, and energy politics. Andrew also served as policy manager and advisor on international financial regulation at both the OSC Ontario Securities Commission and the Financial Service Commissions of Ontario. Andrew holds a bachelor's degree in political science and studies and master's degree in finance from Queen's University in Kingston, a town where I spent 3 years of my career. So it's a pleasure to welcome today Andrew Schrumm from RBC. And Andrew, over to you. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And it's a pleasure to connect with you and your team in the region and learn more about the challenges that our clients and stakeholders are undergoing under these unique times. And Jonathan, thank you so much to you and AWIC for the invitation to speak today, but also including RBC in this discussion. And I'm happy to be the first speaker of the series, as I have the luxury then of getting to frame some of the things you're going to be hearing over the next few days and maybe not have the same feedback at the end. So thank you so kindly. So as discussed, the RBC Thought Leadership Group, We're based in Toronto. We are based co-located with our chief economist team, and we report directly to our CEO, Dave Mackay. We have a few areas of responsibility. Our primary mission is to advance thinking on Canadian prosperity, specifically in the 2020s, but having a long-term vision and how we envision growth, how we think about skills development, and how we think of engaging in a carbon neutral economy. So our three pillars there obviously are innovation, sustainable growth, and human capital, which is the area where I fit in most closely. I'm just going to share my screen, so hopefully please flag me down if I don't have this set up properly. All right, let's make sure you can see me. Awesome, thank you. So I've been giving these talks for a little while, and if I was talking to you a year ago, we would have focused a lot on technology and demographic disruption. But as we've seen, it's been quite a year and a lot has happened. We've seen that disruption can come in many forms, affecting how we work, how we engage, and how we see each other. It's also reminded me, as a researcher that thinks about these things, that we tend to focus what's right in front of us most of the time, and that we need to have a longer-term vision for adapting to the changing nature of work. So today's topic, to me, the future of work, it's not a new debate. And framed in technology, at least, it's not a fear of replacement, as many people feel that way. We've been talking as a society about this replacement of human labor through technology for centuries. You know, Aristotle actually wrote about this thousands of years ago, and he predicted that advances in technology would shift the way we work away from human labor towards machines. Of course, he was talking about the loom, and he was talking about music as well at the time. But this narrative has returned at times of economic uncertainty, and today is not unique. The phrase technological unemployment first appeared in 1917 in literature. And as this article here from 1931 shows, that the use of that terminology and the fear of automation dates back to the early 30s, certainly to the Great Depression. So we're reliving some of the same debates that we've had over and over through the course of our history. And even at boom times, we see this too. JFK used one of his State of the Union speeches to talk about how the American economy was reshaping in this space of machinery and automation. So again, these are things we should have learned well along the way. And can use this once a year. But if we're not learning these lessons, we're doomed to repeat them. So let's use Groundhog Day today to think about how we can break out of our cycle and think about what's next. So plain and simple, I think one of my messages for you today is very much so that the future is now, and that the reality of the future is already here. We've experienced a lot of uncertainty this year, and certainly we have more to come. I think we all crave some clarity on what's next. I wish I had a crystal ball and I could share that with you today. But I hope generally that today's talk provokes some thinking and ideas for you to survey some of the big trends that we're observing from our perch at RBC, but also what it means for you and your workplace, for your workers, and how you're engaging with the future skill set. The recovery is proving to be highly varied for businesses and workers. We're seeing very much this K-shaped recovery, specifically in the labor market. For workers, we're seeing a clear division point at about the $800 a week earnings level. So those above $800 a week have fared fairly well throughout this crisis. Actually, we've seen employment grow in those areas. And in sectors specifically around manufacturing, food, technology, distribution, logistics, and certainly real estate and construction have done fairly well through this crisis. And those workers have been gaining employment, increasing savings, and also, in many cases, buying new homes. But on that bottom end of the K, which is something that we're trying to understand a little bit better, we're seeing more and more permanent job losses. We've seen increased reliance on government support. Certainly sectors in retail, in restaurants and hospitality and accommodations, this will be a long-term recovery. And for many of those workers, we're already vulnerable to a number of income insecurity, to technology disruption, and now to COVID. So Humans Wanted. Humans Wanted is a report that we published 3 years ago. And it was an exercise we took to think about the Canadian skills economy. And essentially we found that even within an automated future, it was the human skills that would be most in demand as we grow. We looked at about 2 million anticipated jobs over about 300 different occupation codes. We looked at where the skills were going and how to engage in youth with these preparations. So one of the biggest takeaways for us was that the tasks that technology takes away actually increases the need for human skills and human collaboration. We forecast at that time that about half the jobs will undergo an overall disruption in tasks and skills, but that a quarter would be the most vulnerable. And generally speaking, that segment of workers were primarily, again, in that lower end education type employment, which we're seeing many parallels with today. At the time, our analysis, we saw that half the jobs would place a high importance on these human skills, namely active listening, speaking, so verbal communication, critical thinking, reading comprehension. And certainly that was played out with a lot of hiring trends at the time. So pre-COVID, LinkedIn published a very interesting survey that about 92% of recruiters in North America at the time said that soft skills mattered as much or more as the harder technical skills that they were looking for. They were looking for people that could adapt in both of those environments, that could contribute regardless of their technical grounding. We also found that math will be important to about 70% of all new jobs that were to be created, that will need to interface with numbers and data in new ways. So I like to include this picture here, and for the educators in the group, this is probably not uncommon. This is a hackathon and very much a product of the last decade, the 2010s. At the start of the decade, and certainly when I was in school, these things did not exist, but have grown to having over 250 hackathons a year within the Hackathon League in the intercollegiate sports, where universities are ranked on how well their hack teams are doing. So to me, this evokes something very interesting, that as you see in this space, working around a computer, working around data challenges, it's not so much that we need a nation of coders, but that we need a nation of critical thinkers, that complex problem solvers and communicators that can operate in this space. Another big takeaway, and in a similar vein that we had from this work, is that the skills needed to build and interact with technology aren't strictly data-centric. When we think about artificial intelligence and our ability to interact with it, this relies heavily on the use of language, communication, and increasingly applying ethics, as much as it does with coding and engineering. At RBC, our Borealis AI, our in-house artificial intelligence unit, is headed by Catherine Hume, who has a PhD in 17th century comparative literature from Stanford. She speaks 7 languages, and she credits her education for giving her the critical skills to read, reconstruct, reinterpret historical thinking into the modern age. So for as technical as the workplace is becoming, we can't lose sight of the liberal arts. Yet in the last 5 years, we've seen a 17% decline in humanities enrollment, while we've seen a 45% increase in math and computer programs. So we have to find a way to be able to bridge those two needs, both in the workplace and in education. So as I mentioned, through Humans Wanted, we looked at the underlying aspects of each job in the Canadian labor market and found the most valued skills coming forward were those that require collaboration and communication. And this is in our report that you can review in more detail. While this was a point in time snapshot, it does signal how we need to equip workers to succeed in an increasingly tech-centered environment by leaning on and increasing our ability to work with through communication and collaboration. But our biggest takeaway and our central finding of this work, which we find increasingly relevant in today's context, is that each job in Canadian labor market is separated by only a small set of skills. What we did in our report was we tried to cluster together different types of work, whether they require different education requirements, different industries, but that were connected so closely around a skills basis that we're able to put them together in these framework to show that people could move fairly easily within these skills clusters, different types of jobs, different industries, with only gaining a few skills along the way. And as we saw, automation will significantly disrupt the skills needs of over a quarter of jobs. So finding ways to have these pathways on a skills basis rather than a credential, rather than strictly an experience with one industry, will be critical to being nimble and adapting to the future. And a lesson here for employers, really the value of retraining. On average, it costs over 20% of an annual salary to replace today's worker with a new one. This could be higher in a unionized environment and where the job is more technical. And the most challenging in tight labor markets, as we experienced pre-COVID, and certainly in some segments we're experiencing right now, and smaller markets like ours that struggle in attracting talent. So I want to spend kind of the bulk of today's conversation around some of the big trends that we're observing in the economy and what that means for the workplace and for employers. So of our group, we tried to step away kind of over the summer and into the fall and think about how these major forces that we're seeing, not that didn't pre-exist COVID, but that have been amplified because of it. And try and think through how this is impacting our future growth strategies. We haven't looked at this in great detail yet, and we are planning to do so, but I wanted to outline for you some of the changing skills and how it's growing in demand. From office towers and shopping malls and stadiums and campuses, much of our economy was built through the 20th century around a model of centralization. The COVID crisis has decimated that, at least for now, but allowing us to work, shop, watch, and learn from anywhere. Navigating the future of work will require Canadians to continue to build on that decentralized future and rebuild some of the centralized models that remain powerful driver of innovation, efficiency, and diversity. And whatever shape and speed that recovery is taking, the Canadian economy will continue to blend past and present, physical and digital, dispensing economic activity and potentially ushering a new era of decentralization. The convenience and for some, the opportunity of a distributed economy is extraordinary, but so too are the consequences. What we've seen from the crisis already is that while many households and businesses continue to thrive, others are falling behind. If the 2020s indeed become the decade of disruption, it could bring heightened pressures for redistribution here too. So our group, we've spent some time thinking about how small businesses are affected by the COVID realities. We hear from our clients, and I'm sure Scott can attest, that there's a strong confidence among entrepreneurs to be challenging themselves and challenging their workers to adapt to new models and try new things. We found that clients feel about 98% of them are okay and have a plan for the future, but most still lack a strong digital strategy. And for many, that has been the lifeline throughout this crisis. In 2017, when we look back, about half of small businesses didn't have a website. Only about 10% of them could process payments online. And according to a BDC study released in December, consumers have shifted their habits. About 56% of consumers are buying more and more online each month. So in this study, and I don't mean to put a confusing chart here, but what we tried to understand was that what industries would be the most affected between the lockdown phase and a recovery phase. And what we found was there were significant amounts of businesses that were more vulnerable than others, and certainly has played out to this effect. We've seen certainly accommodation and food services being challenged in both stages. We've seen transportation very challenged in the lockdown phase, and seeing some recovery slowly. At the same time, I would gravitate to the midpoint of the axis. We see a lot of these industries in technology and professional services that have weathered quite well and will operate well both in recovery and in lockdown. So what this means to me, at least as I observe this, is that the recovery will continue to be uneven, as we've seen in some industries do fairly well through the crisis, actually growing and gaining employment. Others have a very long road ahead. The first months of the crisis were nearly universal in their pain across all sectors. But the early recovery is shown to be much more uneven, which is likely to continue well into this year. While manufacturing bounced back as consumers bought more cars and the businesses invested in protective PPE, higher value services, including finance, real estate, education, healthcare, also showed resilience, while sectors that rely on social gathering and travel, fairly intuitively, retail, restaurants, accommodation, and so on, have struggled. And we continue to see this continuing as we continue this dance with lockdowns. So what does this mean? So it's not clear why GDP and employment haven't recovered in tandem. As we've seen employment strong in some areas, we haven't seen growth in the same way. Some firms will continue to use the recovery to drive efficiencies, invest in machinery, equipment, and technology over labor. As we see major cash buildups, this will be a choice for many businesses of whether they choose to invest in physical infrastructure or whether they choose to invest more in people. Others still may not have a capacity to bring back employees yet safely, despite removal of lockdowns. And to the extent the pandemic permanently alters consumer preferences and the business landscape, recovery among some industries or their employment levels may remain incomplete even as lockdowns are lifted. So this is the first big trend that I'm going to discuss of the few, but I think it's fairly intuitive why we're talking about it today. So the way that we've worked, and certainly the fact that I could be here with you today, really shows how much things have changed. We've seen a friction in the past months, this friction between employers and employees or the terms and conditions of remote work. Half of employees now working from home expect to maintain at least a hybrid model after COVID goes away, while far fewer employers actually want to provide that option. So we're seeing this tension, a growing gap between organizations and their ability to manage distributed workforces as well. About half of Canadian businesses feel that they were unprepared for the technological changes forced on by COVID, in their ability to support remote work over the long term, whether that's devices, whether that's bandwidth, whether that's security, whether it's having mental health support services. I mean, these are challenging times for all. The HR firm Robert Half surveyed HR managers in Canada in the fall and found that companies are making lasting changes to the work-life balance. And this will be appealing for many employees as they consider their options going forward. So about half of firms are thinking more and more about flex time as we've experienced this, folks balancing home and work life. We're seeing more options for compressed work weeks evolving. More part-time and more job sharing also emerges as a lasting impact of how we work. And generally speaking, what we're seeing growing through this period and what we expect to last is more and more of this remote-based technology, having more cloud security, more video conferencing, more chat platforms, and that home office technology interface of having laptops and fitness equipment and speakers, but also all that support network that creates the conditions viable for an at-home work environment. Delivery, logistics, network security, all of that feeds into supporting this process. So at the height of the COVID shutdowns back when things got started in April, about 42% of Canadians who were working at least half of their usual hours from home. And as the labor market rebounded during the spring and summer, this dropped to about a quarter. But as we continue to see lockdowns and cases spiking through the late fall, we saw a number of Canadians returning to be primarily working from home. This trend, obviously, once we have the data, will grow again in January and expect that continue for some time. But the numbers to me are quite outstanding. The number of Canadians working from home increased in December by about 200,000 to 4.8 million workers. And that's about 2.8 million more than normally work from home. So what does this mean? To me, this means that the blended models of our home and office spaces will require employers to invest in distributed tools and technology and to retain talent to enhance productivity. New agreements between employers and employees to share costs and benefits of home work models are needed as well. And what we've seen too, this is creating consumer choice or employee choice. We're seeing that this is some data we ran in December to show how the real estate market is changing outside of the major city centers. And as for someone who lives in Hamilton, I know that the option to not live in Toronto and be able to have a work-life balance, have grass and have good schools, these are things that people are wanting, and they're wanting to see that. Certainly this is an interesting position point for Algoma to be thinking about the type of work arrangements that are viable and thinking about the distributed workforces that are possible in Canada. But it's driven up prices, obviously, in smaller communities for a more comfortable lifestyle. It's also increased rental options and lowered rents in the cities, which will be an interesting trend to watch how youth decide whether they're going to live in suburban, urban, or remote areas. And what we're seeing is this an ongoing blend of remote and office work could see an appetite for people choosing more space and driving away from the cities a bit more. But as we think about what this means for the workplace, thinking about where remote work or all these things that are changing in the way that we work, problem solving is an issue that or a skill set that I think really has come into focus for this past year. What we're trying to do better at is identifying complex problems, evaluating options and solutions. Certainly the plethora of challenges that we've been facing require us at all levels of seniority to be thinking about how we do things differently. And we've partnered and worked through a better working model, but we've got to get better identifying and rewarding these problem-solving practices. Our competitors will be, your competitors will be doing this. They are working through these problems at the same real time that you are, whether it's adapting new technology, whether it's increasing employee health and wellness. There's a number of these issues that need to be thought of. We're also trying to think about how creativity plays a factor in the workforce. And one thing that at least we've observed early on is that throughout the COVID crisis, there has been kind of a fracture point between how companies are hiring for the skill of creativity. What we've seen in healthcare and education, we've seen a spike in roles that demand more and more creativity, while as sectors such as natural resources, which has been hit fairly hard through this, they're receding. The innovation, the drive to recreate has not been present, at least in their hiring practices to date. So that's something to think about. Second, this is relevant to a lot of retailers and hospitality providers, and we are shopping differently. We're shipping more locally. We're shipping our packages from everywhere, and we're buying more locally. What we're anticipating to continue is this blended model for pickup and a drive to cut the delivery costs. More than half of consumers have used a buy online and pick up in store model, the curbside model. And this has grown by more than 500% during the pandemic. It accounts for about 42% of orders in the summer. And we saw that more than double that it was the prior year. One of the key challenges here, though, for the small businesses to think about is loyalty, consumer loyalty. We see a huge number of people buying products and services from brands they've never tried before. And if you relied on loyalty before, they may not be there in the future. We've been exposed to so many different alternatives, and this remains a challenge for the business models going forward. But it's also an opportunity to take the ball from someone else, that consumers and buyers are showing a willingness to try different things, certainly if you have an online presence. What we've seen, though, as illustrated there, is that the COVID crisis has, for many retailers, helped catalyze transformation. More than half of the persistent growth in e-commerce sales since April has been driven by brick and mortar retailers adapting to the virtual workplace. Some of these gains were driven by e-commerce, which Canadians had been slower to adapt than other countries. But it also fueled by a jump, as discussed, this curbside pickup model, as consumers look to get more out of home and speed up delivery. So what does this mean for the workplace? The demand for e-commerce will still, the demand for e-commerce is still there if retailers can embrace the transition to digital sales channels and pivot their efforts to equip better platforms for consumers who are scrolling online. When we think about the workplace, we think about the skill set that this type of model will drive. And we think systems analysis is probably the skill set that, not isolated to one role or another, but that is growing. We find that this shift creates increased insights on consumers, seeing their purchasing habits and preferences in an online space, creating new relationships with customers. How we shop will increase the demand for systems analysis skills, both in the design of how consumers interact with your firm, but also on the back end with what you do with all that data. System analysis is increasingly important in every role, knowing how things fit together and capturing value from it. That kind of skill in retail, hospitality, and so on will grow in the years ahead and be fundamental to driving growth. But there are risks to this model. We did some analysis in the fall looking at how facial recognition for retailers has been this exciting new avenue for creating new systems tools and understanding the consumer better. But as you may have read, Cadillac Fairview, the major mall, has come under great scrutiny from the privacy commissioner on how to use that. So there is a fine balance. So this is not to be done casually. I want to share with you also a thought on how we watch, how we consume information. And we're all in the content business. We're all creating material such as today, or we're talking through digital channels more and more, interacting through social media. It's not a one-way street anymore. We are pushing out content as much as we consume it. And we want to interact with it. What we've seen over the course of the crisis is the spike in gaming that's two-way, online gaming and interactive, social media as well. And we've also seen traditional forms drop. Part of that is through physical distancing, of course, but this stickiness of moving to these on-demand services, we believe will be something to watch for sure. We're seeing, about 244 million Americans played video games last year, up 15% from 2018. We're looking at politics. This is engaging in many ways. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has become quite notorious for her streaming on Twitch, engaging different audiences, at times reaching 500,000 viewers at one time. And TikTok, something that I'd never heard of before crisis and somehow has come into my house, their algorithms have led to heightening levels of engagement among us. It outperforms YouTube. It's created more personalities and celebrities at the same time. So we need to be thinking about how we engage with each other and we create content that is valuable. These are skills that are important. So here, the emerging skill for us we see is the digital media, the multimedia skills. I mean, this is something we've been talking about for a long time. It's perhaps not surprising. But what it means is the personalized nature of arts and entertainment content that we've come used to in the last few months is more important going forward, along with all these AI recommendation search engines that have come up with targeted advertising. For arts and culture providers, we'll need to be able to develop new and immersive experiences. This past year, we've seen sales of artificial augmented reality or virtual reality headsets grow by nearly a quarter. And over the last 5 years, it's grown by tenfold. We've seen professional leagues and teams from esports and so on grow. And even in, it's kind of remind me of the NHL Fox swipe of the puck from 20 years ago, but augmented reality in the way that we view our sports and entertainment, it's happening everywhere. So it's been already hot in demand, but these skills, being able to be fluent in digital and multimedia at any kind of work will continue to grow. And again, your competitors are doing it. And if you don't, you will get outpaced. So my fourth takeaway from what we're observing, and I'm mindful of time, that we share differently, and it's similar to how we view, but we are sharing things in very different ways. We're creating more data than ever before. And this can be shaped and informed, certainly in a business environment when we can be able to understand our consumers better. Global internet traffic this year has increased, well, even between February and April last year, it grew by 40%. Data creation is 10 times the amount this past year as it was in 2017. We need to be able to invest in the skills that work with the tools and technology and what it means to your business. So our big takeaway is that many organizations have more data now and more data than they know what to do with. So a data strategy is key. It's important to have data analysts. It's important to have those skill sets. But, one area, certainly in the bank, that we're trying to understand more is data solutions, or data architects, to understand how all of this supports your business. This is something that is challenging on a smaller operation, but it's become more and more fundamental in the competitive space. Oftentimes, data and organizations are siloed across different departments or different knowledge sets. We think that needs to be broken down, pursuing more comprehensive and holistic approaches to data that can help organizations cut through less useful data and leverage the good stuff. But more data also means a greater risk of security. And these are 21st century problems that creates more vulnerability, and the need for cybersecurity skills within your firm obviously is increasing. So what does this mean for the workforce? So for our take, we think resource management, and broadly defined, that's both the physical space, but also how you use people and technology. So we're seeing a greater demand, obviously, for data services, data strategy, and connectivity through the Internet of Things. Firms are making large investments in bandwidth, especially for smaller centers, and in residential, we're seeing multi-tenant buildings having to require greater upgrades in their bandwidth capacity. We're seeing more flexible approaches to privacy to balance safeguards against new and existing threats. But this highlights the point that we need in firms and in our own portfolio of skills. Resource management becomes even more important. You find this in organizations or elsewhere, but to help support the data analysis. You get a better handle on the physical data infrastructure within your operation. It's essentially the point. And these, again, aren't exclusive to one position or another. Data management is a shared responsibility across the organization. Important in this time to be thinking about training your staff with that. Very quickly, and I don't know about you, but I've been thinking about the summer and all that hopefulness that might be able to break out of my four walls for a bit. But we're going to see very similar trends this coming year in travel as we did last. Surveys continue to say that Canadians are significantly less likely to travel to other provinces in this time, whether it's connection with healthcare or not. But 63% prefer to drive now than they did to fly, while only 32% are willing to stay in a hotel or resort right now. So looking ahead this summer, there remains a lot of optimism. Certainly I have it, for some stability, but the reality is we'll continue to see a boost in localized travel. What we're seeing then, obviously, is hopefully more localized models for tourism, for engagement, for accommodations, for retail, for restaurants, and this will take a unique skill set, one that we call creativity. It's a wonderful opportunity right now for accommodation and hospitality providers to rethink their offering to consumers, whether that's creating that physical or virtual experience that no one else can provide. I think for marketing of local communities, it becomes very important to be thinking about where this blend comes from. What is that value that a consumer will get from traveling to your area? I know you'll be speaking about healthcare in this series, but we're also following this as well, especially on the skills side, to be thinking about how we heal and how we're connecting, not just within the COVID environment, but going forward. So what we've expected, the projections forward think that in 5 years, the telehealth economy will exceed $175 billion US around the world. And many patients and doctors wouldn't have been comfortable with all these video consultations prior to the pandemic, but it's become normalized. It's become something that I think will become quite routine. Even the government is spending on elderly benefits that will triple to $99 billion from 10 years ago. And a lot of these resources will be applied to finding new models, upgrading health records, finding ways to engage the health sector in these important times. So what does this mean? We see that universities and colleges are a prime place for this innovation to come through, certainly around the training and delivery of these technologies, but thinking about universities and colleges in Ontario, thinking of that as a driver of innovation. I had a chance to visit Mohawk College, and the nursing programs there that they do within augmented reality that can be done virtually to be able to test environments and so on is critical. And as those skill sets are developed within the student, those will continue forward. Certainly communication is really that skill set that perhaps has not always been best in healthcare, but we're finding in our analysis, this is one area that has really grown. This experience has shown us how dependent we are on great healthcare, but it's also shown us some of our weak points, whether it be diagnosis, whether it be elder care, but also the way we communicate with one another around health. And we can't come back with the jobs of the past. We need telehealth, we need health technicians, we need that IT expertise, and we need home care when it comes down to it. The skills needed in healthcare, we did a whole paper on this just over a year ago, just before the pandemic. And what we learned then was communication was very much a critical point, and educators responding to that. Remote health and health at home, we're finding the requirements of communication are changing. And I know you'll also be speaking about education. So I wanted to share with you some of the thoughts we've had. We've been trying to think about how online learning, certainly in the post-secondary space, will have lasting vestiges beyond the crisis. We've seen education as being disrupted both in the classroom and in the business model. Certainly this week's news about Laurentian University filing for creditor protection shows that it's a very important time for colleges and universities to think about how they're delivering their services and doing it in a way that is economical, but also focused on the skills needed in their communities. What we've seen generally with online education, and you'll be learning much more about this week, I'm sure, but traffic for online courses, massive online open courses, grew at 2.5 times from January to June last year. Quite impressive. We've had this tension in the Canadian edtech space where we've seen massive amounts of venture capital. We've seen a massive amount of excitement about edtech. But at the same time, global education spending has only been about 2% on technology. And COVID has kind of had the educators catch up with what's possible. I have 3 young kids at home who are on remote school and expect to be there for some time. And I can, relate to probably the experience many of you had, that, it's a whole new method of teaching and is shaping expectations of both the student, but also the teacher along the way. So what we are starting to see as kids are moving towards post-secondary, what does this disaggregation of education mean? When you can take education in a piecemeal, one-by-one type way, what you start to see are menu-based degrees with more and more transferable credits that you're able to, we anticipate that there'll be more collaboration among institutions, but also between levels. So more between colleges, among universities and polytechnics, along the way, that there needs to be this better sharing and specialization of what skill sets are best delivered by one institution or another, and that a student would be able to gain those skills from the most reasonable provider, and being able to basket those together. We've also seen through this time, private sector really revamp how they're delivering courses to their employees. Corporate learning and management systems have been a major investment in the last year. We've also seen, and at RBC, we've experienced this quite a bit, in the ways that we engage with students. This past summer, we had made a commitment pre-COVID to 1,200 students to provide internships for the summer. And we found a way to retain all of those students and put them in a virtual space for the summer. So that lost skill set, that for many that lost income, but also that career building experience was retained. And I'm interested as a researcher to see how those knock-ons continue, of how working your first job online from a computer from home will shape your expectations and vantage points and your way of learning. So for us, what we're trying to watch here. This means an opportunity for colleges and universities to offer reskilling and more micro-credential programs. As I was saying, that disaggregation of a degree to cater to those who have either lost a job or in an industry that's recovery is uncertain. And I think it's important to reflect back a bit that while Canada, among the OECD, has the highest level of tertiary education, so colleges, universities, CEGEP, polytechnics, we haven't done a great job when it comes to that job training aspect, whether it be continuing education or those who are most affected by disruption. These numbers are a bit old, but what it tries to show is that someone at the lower end of literacy skills in this case, so a lower skilled or lower educated worker, is over 5 times less likely than those at the higher end to pursue job training, whether that's ongoing skill development or workplace learning. This is an important gap that we're going to have to be able to counter in the coming recovery. Certainly, as we've seen long-term unemployment surge faster in this crisis than we have in any other recent recession. It's grown by 250% since the beginning of the pandemic. And that spike is faster than we've seen in other downturns. It's a natural consequence of sudden virus containment measures, of course, but these long periods of joblessness can have multiple consequences, including eroding skills and increasing the likelihood of affected workers dropping out of the labor force altogether. So retraining and focusing on those, as I started on the bottom end of the K of the employment recovery, will be critical. We need to reckon with the fact that we're lower among the OECD of giving fair or equitable retraining opportunities to those across the skill levels. So in this space, when we think about how we learn, collaboration is really this emerging skill set that, again, was with us before, but has accelerated quite a bit during the crisis. We have this greater need for campuses and classrooms, but we don't need those environments all the time. We have a new option for many. We have this convenience of online learning. Employers have a role here to help. Certainly navigating this uncertainty, employers need to be partners with educators well beyond simply helping them with lectures, but also looking to collaborate to develop the right skills for this changing workplace. And to find ways that we can interact with one another across the education dynamic. There is a power of digital education, and it's not just online, but those data and insights and new ways of assessing skills, the new ways of having, whether it be an AI tool or others, assess the deep side of someone's learning. So we can identify where their need for upgrading lies. And this is something that I know a number of schools are considering. We also need to think about education as a consumer product, similar to other consumer trends across the economy. The speed of the end user, at operating at the speed of the end user, not the producer. So having a very student-centric approach to when we're thinking about both first degrees, but also through continuing job retraining. Finally, the last trend I wanted to talk to you about here is how we trade. And I know for a number of businesses in Algoma, the cross-border relationship is quite important. You know, through this crisis, as we've seen through other economic downturns, there's quite a bit more protectionism. We've seen government intervention in technology, whether it's Huawei or TikTok. We've seen this appetite to create more nationalized approaches. And in North America, we've seen a growing pressure to reduce reliance on Chinese trade, even as it increases through the pandemic. And we've seen the Chinese economy rebound quite fast. But despite this, the Canadian imports from China grew 34% from February to July, while our exports only rose 21%. So we continue to see this gap. Our relationship with the US and with Europe continues to be about flat through all this time. We're also seeing more buy local initiatives, which is a good thing. But governments have been launching campaigns in Ontario, BC, Quebec, and Ontario. And this has created more consumer habit, which is what's excellent news. Nearly 80% of Canadians say they're more likely to choose a Canadian brand over an alternative now. But when we think about the new relationship with the incoming or the now new US administration, we can anticipate that the new president, President Biden, won't be necessarily more pro-trade than President Trump was, in part because of the focus to protect American jobs in the process as a Democratic Party for many decades. But we anticipate that trading relationships with the US will be more predictable and are more likely to work through existing bilateral or multilateral frameworks rather than crook trigger Twitter feuds. But we're less likely to use unilateral tariffs in the same way that the previous administration did. And we anticipate that Canada will likely be less of a target of any retaliatory measures going forward. We've already seen a push from the US for more onshoring of their procurement of government services. But generally speaking, Canada hasn't had great access to that market. So we don't see a lot of loss in that posturing. But we're also observing more generally with America, but also with our European partners, there'll be some effort to reshore manufacturing. Although we haven't seen all this come forward yet, we are anticipating the Biden administration to be a bit more clear in what their efforts to reshore manufacturing will look like. And we continue our view that a broader disentanglement of industry supply chains across the Canada-US border in the near term would be exceptionally expensive for those. So we see that as unlikely. We see supply chains continuing to remain strong in this period. And as both economies now have a focus on net zero and climate-related policies, we anticipate that the Ontario economy certainly will benefit from a greater emphasis on developing climate-related technologies and electric vehicles and automotive supplies. So what does this mean for skills? So I kind of hard to think about how skills relate to trade directly, but really what we've tried to observe through COVID is that we need to have the ability to better understand the person or the organization on the other side. So the skills that we see rising in importance for exporters and importers is social perceptiveness. This comes along with cultural awareness, it comes with language, but also has an importance in relating to being able to understand the pressures that your trading partner is under and being able to adapt and propose new ways of working together. So we see this, we need to be able to understand how people in other parts of the world act, behave, and interact to be able to be strong partners. So just looking at the time, I'll wrap up kind of quickly here. So this forecast, there's a couple lines here to look at, but this is RBC Economics, forecast of how a vaccine may help speed up our recovery. But either scenario, whether we have an effective, highly effective vaccine or moderately effective vaccine, the economy isn't poised to return to pre-pandemic levels for at least another year. As we saw at the top of the presentation, we've seen these shocks impact different industries in different ways. So there's a bit of a multi-track story in the way that we're seeing growth in the future. And some of these industries will need to, as they come out of a recession and into growth, we'll need to find new ways, creative methods of replacing their legacy models, as this may be their one chance to resume growth. Excuse me. So I guess my top lesson that I want to have you to take away from today is that throughout all this time, we're seeing an increased decentralization of business, of trade, of learning, of healthcare. We're having more localized solutions to local problems. We're having more business adapt to local options. we're challenging the old and control those old control and centralized models. And it's not about geography. It's not about moving from traditional models to online or e-commerce or online learning. People are craving a balance, whether it be in shopping and work, entertainment, or in education. There's no longer a one-size-fits-all model that adapts to the preferences and anticipates their needs. But to get to that new decentralized economy, we need to be bridging this gap. We need to be thinking about these tools that we need to put in place today. In our Navigating 2021 report, we identified a few of these issues. We believe we need to be addressing long-term unemployment in sectors that rely on that centralized model and in the close proximity of workers. We need to be transforming skills programs so less educated service workers are ready for a digitally driven economy. You can certainly see this in retail. We need to be building new approaches to supporting female employees and entrepreneurs who have been outsized impacted by employment losses during COVID. We need to be assisting businesses and communities to build the digital infrastructure and skills needed to thrive in a distributed platform-based economy. We need to be investing in natural resource sectors, including energy, to develop new technologies for firms and regions to lead the transition to a net zero economy. We need to be redesigning our cities, our towns and communities to absorb and support redistributed workforces. And finally, we need to reimagine education to develop the skills for this redistributed world. And my final thoughts, as we look to the 2020s, we could probably confidently say this has already been this most disruptive decade that we will ever experience. And we still have 9 years left to go. But something to think about that as we navigate the shoals that existed before the crisis remain today. Canada is an aging economy. We have in 2016, we switched to become a super aged economy. We have more old people than we have young people. And this is only expected to widen. We need to be thinking about ways to be engaging young people through education, to be more productive and contributing to the workforce. We are certainly through COVID have experienced a dramatic shortfall in immigration. In 2020, we saw about 150,000 fewer permanent residents than we had planned for. While the government's planning to ramp that up by adding about 50,000 over the next 3 years, we anticipate, at least in our analysis, that this year may be even harder. So for the first 6 months, we're only anticipating 1/4 of the target for the year, leaving 300,000 permanent residents on target for the second half of this year. And we're not sure that we'll be able to keep pace. And finally, as we talked about, and I'm sure you've been involved in many discussions about technology, but it's not technology that's necessarily about automation, about job loss. We need to have, as we continue rethinking about our economy, this new understanding of the human-machine relationship where both parts can excel, complementing, as I was kind of hammering home earlier, those humanities and liberal arts skills that can work more cleanly within a technological space. So with that, thank you very much for letting me walk through some of these top trends that we're seeing. And Jonathan was very kind to speak to our various reports. I would encourage you to check out rbc.com/thoughtleadership. There you can find all our economic analysis, but also some of our forward-looking pieces, and my contact information is here as well if you have any questions. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Wow. See, you came as advertised. Every glowing thing I said at the beginning, you just that presentation was fantastic. So the one issue I have with it is I was writing down questions as we were going through, and then you would answer the question like on the next slide or in a slide later. So extremely thorough presentation. there were a number of comments coming up in the chat just about some of the reports. So we were directing people to the reports.
Thank you.
We did have a question. I think it came about when you were talking about the trade trends, especially with the United States, with China. So kind of like the nationalist global trend. But I guess just what impact or do you think the conservative government has in, or I guess what would you say what trends are due to the conservative Ontario government holding power? So in, I guess in terms of trade, or even like direction of sectors like carbon neutral economy and things like that.
Yeah, well, that's an invitation to walk on a landmine.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, as some of our work, we're trying to think about the innovation economy. And unfortunately, what we've seen, some trends, even pre-COVID, is this gravitation away from public sector support for research. It's not necessarily a bad thing. We're seeing more and more of this collaboration between private sector and universities and colleges to create more of an innovative economy, to create more R&D and so on. But unfortunately, there are knock-on effects of having, certainly in the university space, the current government is moving more to performance-based models and funding being tied more closely to delivery of outcomes, which again, for educators is a bit more challenging. So we're concerned, at least what we're trying to watch, where funding will go in terms of the innovation economy in this current recovery, because we see creativity, we see innovation as being critical. Not to bore, but the economic theory of creative destruction, which I'm sure we're all well attuned with, Ben essentially says that in periods of recession, creative activity recedes. And in times of growth, creativity grows. And we're going to need that investment and that commitment to having R&D and having innovation for the province, but also the country, to be able to recoup and seize on these opportunities.
All right, I'm just checking. Looks like more of a comment here. Okay, actually, we just had someone from Sioux College making a comment, but they had to get back to teaching, so they enjoyed the presentation. I guess I have a question for you. Again, maybe not the easiest thing, but you definitely, your presentation did a great job of highlighting those emerging skills. And I guess, how would you frame those skills, for that question? I'm sure you get it. I get it all the time. Our number one customer, basically, are students.
Yes.
Or parents. And it's that question of, what should I be looking at as a career if you're a student, or what skills should I have, or what should I do to prepare for my future career or decide on a career?
Yeah, I mean, if our jobs would be easy if that was an easy answer. But I think the thing, and you probably experienced more than I, but what we're able to see is that those who can have multiple skill sets are able to operate most efficiently in the labor market. It's an old cliche. I've been hearing it my whole life, of that we'll all have multiple jobs throughout our lifetime. That's starting to play out, and I think it's important that those transferable skills are important. So that's why our study looked at how you can navigate the future based on your experience in one job and its correlation to another based on the skill sets that you develop. So, it's important that those hybrid models come out. You even look at, employers are trying to do this. We're trying to do this with our students that we engage. We have a program called Amplify, which we weren't able to run this past year as well, but generally we bring in music students, we bring technology students, we bring in business students, we cluster them together to say, here's some business challenges that we want you to tackle, and come back at the end of the summer with some business solutions. And what we've had great success. Every year we have about 15 to 18 patents registered from these teams. and having that collision of these different skill sets working together is important. So looking for those opportunities early in career, I think, is quite important. That to get siloed early on, unfortunately, it removes that adaptability and flexibility, as you progress in your career.
Yeah, I mean, I'm same thing. It's always like you have to find something that you're,
Yeah,
truly interested
something got to
in.
pay the bills. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But there's no question that, you have to be adaptable, and everything you talked about, like the problem solving, creativity, communication, and then all those technical skills. You need those regardless of whether you're interested in, career in construction or healthcare or retail. Like the retailers that are doing well or have their site going, or obviously have those digital skills.
Yes.
So there's nothing that is, there's
Yeah,
no
I mean,
cookie cutter career anymore.
absolutely. So I was trying to do, I did a bit of a modeling of careers in the skilled trades, the red seal trades, to look at how the advent of technology, especially around IoT, artificial intelligence, and robotics, what that looks like on a skills basis. Once you start chipping away at the tasks and responsibilities of a machinist or a welder or any number of trades roles. And what, at least my observations from that, were that as those technologies are fit for purpose, fit for those careers, fit for those tasks, it's very obvious that the ability of someone to operate not just along technology, but to be able to add those value add skills of being able to, reimagine a service or communicate findings or build in data sets. These are things that are, any nature of jobs, we need to be able to cultivate those skill sets for folks. So, it's to me, at least, someone who stares at these numbers every day, it's obvious where things are going when you think about more technology. The human skills really jump out.
We had a question just on, I guess, a practical level in your reporting. That you do in your research. Have you done any comparisons, I guess, at a regional level or like urban versus rural, divides?
Yeah, I mean, we've tried to. It's challenging to be definitive. I mean, there's been some very fascinating analysis done by the Institute of Competitiveness and Prosperity in Toronto that's tried to look at clusters of industry and where geographically they reside. So, taking the model, the supercluster model, the federal model now, but seeing where manufacturing, seeing where construction, seeing where knowledge-based industries are clustered more and more together. And we're seeing that starting to happen more in the, I don't want to be GTA biased, but we're seeing a lot of that surrounding cities more and more, that it's not, those knowledge sets often are driven by post-secondary institutions, which drive the skill set that's attained in an area, and then you see more collaboration among the private sector. So, I want to put that value right back to post-secondary institutions of creating those linkages locally. Generally speaking, what we've seen, and there's been studies in the States on this, that job growth in cities has been biased towards those with a post-secondary education, and job growth for those without has been very flat in the city, in an urban environment. The folks outside of an urban space, you see kind of leveling out. You see job growth of non-college folks being relatively at pace. So that's the biggest thing that's jumped out to me, that education level in city and non-city has been quite evident.
Yeah, and I mean, I will plug AWIC here. This is really our role is kind of, I mean, we obviously are engaged in all these trends and that sort of thing, and try to bring the local picture to it. So, when I said I go on the thought leadership, RBC Thought Leadership page, I really do. And it's like, oh, that's a great metric or perspective. How do we, get that perspective in Algoma? So, we try to localize that information as well. We've got a few more questions here. And again, these questions are super easy to answer, Andrew. So how do you get employers to, to buy in on these hiring trends? So, I guess that question is, how do you get them to hire based on maybe these softer skills or experiences versus, the resume or
Yeah.
Past experience?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's certainly, coming from the largest employer in Canada, we are a bit biased in the sense that we have a bit of a broader toolkit when we're thinking about how to employ, or we have more variety of jobs. The smaller the employer, obviously, the more challenging it would be, because I could imagine needing that flexibility and cross skill sets or very specific needs. So, I mean, what we've tried to emphasize, and this relates to newcomers, folks entering the labor market, but also who are coming to Canada for the first job in Canada. It's at times hard to assess someone's prior skill set and their prior abilities. And, it may sound counterintuitive to be hiring for skills when you're thinking about youth or thinking about newcomers, that there may not be that experiential demonstration there. There's more and more tools out there that I think, Bow Valley College in Alberta has done some very fascinating work on how to assess skill sets coming into a job, how to see those creative skills and creative measures. And the way they're trying to get around that is thinking about how to create micro-credentials and so on for these basic skills, for communication, for writing, for all that, so that you have a bit of more demonstration. And certainly that's just one example, but think about how to apply that. And I had some discussion. There's an education review happening in Manitoba right now. And one of the areas they're looking to potentially pilot, mainly working through post-secondaries, is to try and have an add-on to a transcript. So, a transcript shows your performance in accounting and in algebra and so on, but it doesn't show you what you're good at for the workplace. So something they're considering to pilot and building it in, certainly with their co-op programs, is showing, an assessment of those basic skills through a transcript. And it's something that we're quite interested to follow. And I think there could be some strong benefit if that's widely adopted.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point. And I think, just speaking in Algoma, I think employers are coming around to this. You still do see people looking to hire, and they'll want like 5 years experience, for an entry level job. And it's kind of like, okay, well, that's a person that's maybe even going to leave our region to get that experience and then not come back. So I think employers are shifting a little bit. And part of it, you talked about the aging workforce. Like a lot of employers just need to bring people in and are bringing people in and adapting.
And I was just going to say, and I think at some level, with putting those requirements out there, puts out a responsibility for employers too. And certainly RBC is thinking about this a lot, to say, if we are going to demand that, someone who's a few years into the career has these skills, we need to be hiring more young people to develop those skills. And to be hiring folks from different disciplines, so that you don't have just in our case, the business grad or charter holder that's coming through their system, that we need to be challenging ourselves to be hiring different skills.
And so I think this will be our last question. And again, another really easy one. I'll just read the question verbatim. One thing we've seen in the pandemic is the difficulty of systems to swiftly adapt to change. How do you think education systems like K-12, universities, colleges need to adapt in order to better prepare young people with the emerging skills you discussed? And what do you think will need to happen to encourage these changes to happen quickly? So I guess what the impetus would be, or do you think the education systems are working well as they are? So, I mean, you touched upon that in your presentation with the changing models but there you go, I guess.
It's a big question, and I
Yeah.
hope I hope to give some a well thought out answer. So my mind immediately gravitates to a paper I'm writing right now on creative skills, and the thing that jumped out to me when we were trying to capture where in our labor market do creative thinkers reside, and by far the education sector employs the most creative thinkers, because teachers, naturally. So we have that original source of creative people educating our youth, which is exciting. You know, I spent a lot of time thinking about online education in the spring, thinking about these adapted models of what that means. I think in many ways, it just accelerates the change that we were already seeing. You know, we just talked about my credentials, we talked about kind of skills assessments. Having more tools and toolkit for educators because of technology. I mean, they were there a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, but this impetus to rethink how we're doing. I think investment too, as we've seen greater investments in not just online, but different ways of doing education in remote ways has, you know, the fact with public spending is once you spend that dollar, you're going to spend that dollar next year as well, the same amount until it gets cut back. So I do think there's a stickiness there in the way that we're adapting more personalized education. And I think that's the key aspect there, that technology provides us that opportunity to make education and assessment of outcomes more personalized, more localized, and the responsibility then comes to be able to pair those needs with better tools, right? So that we can make sure that we're creating the skill sets that we're talking about. And it's not a technology, you know, credit goes entirely to educators, administrators, of being bold and of being able to link. And I think we both agree, linking with local employers and job training and all these knowledge based inputs that we have to education to provide that those linkages happen. So again, technology is part of the story, and with those investments, that's a head start. It's just now, how do we make sure that we're connecting those dots and not just missing this opportunity for crisis being an impetus for change?
Yeah, I like that. Be bold. So yeah, I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in, obviously, in education. And I think just from a regional perspective, obviously, you know, we're dealing with some provincial level decision making, but
Yes.
the one of the benefits of being in a smaller area, district like Algoma, is we can be pretty quick to adapt and find ways to work together and work within the system. So I mean, I do see, you know, obviously there's lots of opportunities for employers to engage with, whether it's Sioux College or Algoma University or with our school boards. So, and the employers, you know them, like, you know who the people are, and they're, you know, they come to the table. So, but I mean, yeah, as you said, this year has been a year like no other. I'm certainly much more engaged, I'm ashamed to say, now in my kids' education because it was
Yes.
happening in our living room.
Yeah.
And, you know, well, I think big picture, maybe things move slowly. I mean, how quickly the adaption was from in classroom to like synchronous learning remotely was extremely quick and impressive. So, I mean, you know, now I guess there's no reason not to think that, you know, these big changes can happen. So
Exactly.
Andrew, incredible presentation. Thank you very much. You've set the bar extremely high for our other subject matter experts. So we really appreciate your time that you spent putting together the presentation, joining us here. Yeah, I mean, I can't thank you enough. I look forward to reading your future work and reports. And just a reminder, everybody who joined in, the webinar was recorded. So again, that link will come out in an email afterwards. When you log off, there'll be a brief survey. So if you can just fill that out, we'd like to get your thoughts on today. And if you haven't already done so, if you have an interest in the other webinars, if you just go to awic.ca, you can join in there. And any parting thoughts, Andrew?
No, I just wanted to say thank you, and I look forward to hearing how well the other sessions go, and very much appreciate again for you for including RBC in this series.
Yes, thank you. And Scott, did you want to say a final word? I see the skyline there.
No, thanks, Andrew and Jonathan. Great presentation, and stay safe, everyone.
Okay,
Take
thank
care.
you.